I'm Leah Irving. This was a project developed with Dr. Hoffman for the Indigenous Culture and Health 130 unit for the Faculty of Health Sciences. Essentially, we were trying to raise awareness of the fact that Indigenous cultural stories are embedded in the landscape. So we wanted students to go out into this urban environment, the cityscape, and listen to stories that were associated with that place. And so become reflective or be reflective about the layering of stories that are in this space. The pedagogy was reflective, but it was also authentic in that these were authentic stories told by an Aboriginal person. That's their story. So it wasn't reading it from a book or listening to it from a lecturer. It was actually listening to it from that person. We used augmented reality, and that it was GPS activated, so when they actually got to that spot, they could click on that and the story would be told. So they would be in that space and listen to that story there. So we couldn't do it with any other technology. One example was Kings Park, so there's stories embedded there. They would go to Kings Park, click on their phone, and the story would come up, so they're in Kings Park listening to that story. We have a web application as well, and that is because some students don't have smartphones, and for our external students. So they get more or less the same experience, but through a web page. So they can go in, open up the stories and that. Students create a reflective journal as part of their unit, and this augmented that, or was a resource for them to reflect on these narratives and write in their reflective journal. They weren't meant to reflect on anything in particular, and we couldn't build this into the assessment anyway because a lot of people don't have smartphones. So it was something that they chose to do, and it was just to assist them in their overall reflection of Aboriginal culture. One girl from who grew up here in Perth said that she had studied Aboriginal culture in primary school and that, but had never heard those kinds of stories, that it was kind of always historical events and that, but this really made her think more about, Aboriginal culture as being here and not just sort of in colonial terms or in opposition to colonisation. We were expecting more students to actually use the app. About 30 or 40 students used it in the end, and feedback from the students was really positive. A lot of them said that they had never heard those sort of stories before because they are very, not personal stories, but sort of personally, culturally personal. I actually went to their tutorial class and gave them a demonstration of the app, and I also created instructions on Blackboard, did screen captures and more or less a how to use the app. So most of them are pretty technology savvy, so it's okay. What worked well was the successful reflection and that from students, that they really did enjoy those stories in that space. And the fact that those stories were, sort of belonged to that place, that made it more sort of powerful in a sense. What didn't work so well was that there wasn't enough. We can only put a few in for the pilot, but there needs to be more stories and more content, probably different stories, different places and that, but places where they can get to easily, that they can just come across. As a practice for them to use the app, I created a small scene on campus that was located, that picked up stories about artworks, public artworks that are around, and I got one of the lecturers that actually created that artwork, and he told the history of that artwork, and that actually came up in one of the interviews, and they said, we've never sort of thought about that artwork before. Now every time I go past it, I think about who created that and what it's about. So I think creating something on campus and looking at the stories that are associated with this area will make it more engaging for them. I would suggest to lecturers that are thinking about using this to really think about the pedagogy before they think about just using the technology. So I would think really about what you want to do first, and I'd really research if you wanted to use augmented reality. I'd really research the kind of augmented reality apps that are available. There's quite a few.